people in and out of the city, and instead just beautify it. There has been suggestions that we should hang some lovely plants and flowers on the either side of it to create a hanging garden. So that would be really nice. Our city council has not yet decided what is going to happen with it. You take a look to our left, we see the back side of the Air Canada Centre. The red letters on that grey building is where that is. This is the home of the Toronto Maple Leafs, our NHL hockey team, as well as our basketball team of the NBA, the Toronto Raptors. Also lots of fantastic concerts happening there. This summer we had the Rolling Stones perform there last week. We're also going to have Beyonce perform this summer in July. As we continue along Lakeshore Boulevard, we're approaching Yonge Street, one of the longest streets in the world, and if you look to the right, you can see a brown building. You'll see a little bit more of it as we go around the corner. This has the very prestigious address of 1 Yonge Street. It is the Toronto Star, a very popular newspaper here in the city. The Toronto Star, very important history, as it was the first newspaper in the world to be banned in Germany during World War II because they were very outspoken against Hitler's regime. If any of you are a fan of the comic book creator, Joe Shuster of Superman, he also was a worker at the Toronto Star in his earlier days. Just a reminder to remain seated up top as we are going to be going under a bridge. And we're good to go. To your left as we emerge from the bridge, you'll see a fantastic view of the CN Tower just to our left. It won't last long, but there it is. There it is. Wow. And it's gone. Well, we're coming up now to stop 20, which I believe no one on the bus currently is interested in departing. This is the Hockey Hall of Fame just on the left side of us. Fantastic place to check out some really cool hockey memorabilia, including the Stanley Cup, the trophy of honor of hockey teams that win the NHL playoffs. As we continue along Front Street, we're going to be coming up to a Trompe d'Oeil. This is a trick of the eye mural. It'll be on the left side behind these trees on the back of a brown-red building. This Trompe d'Oeil is kind of trying to trick you into which windows are real and which ones are not. Some are just painted on, other ones are actual windows. Pretty cool. It's on the back of the Goodyear Flatiron building, this building just to our left. You might be familiar with the Chicago or New York Flatiron buildings. They're a little more popular than ours, but ours is the oldest and the prototype of the other two. If you look behind us, you'll have a fantastic view of the Toronto skyline with the Flatiron building in the front and the skyline in the back. We're coming up now to stop 21, which is for the St. Lawrence Market. Fantastic place to get all sorts of different things to eat. It is closed on Sundays and Mondays, but nevertheless, a lovely area of town. This is Old Toronto, the part of town we're going through. And as we're in a very old area of town, we're on one of the oldest streets, and it is also the bumpiest, so just a reminder to hold on in case you need to, because we are going to have a little bit of a bumpy ride on Front Street. Front Street is very literally named because the Toronto Harbour used to actually come all the way up to here. In the 1840s and 50s, if we were here on a bus at that time and we looked out the right side of the vehicle, we wouldn't see all these buildings. We would actually see a 10 to 15 foot drop into Toronto's harbour. And in that harbour, we would see a lot of garbage because that's where we threw all of our garbage in that time. 5 landfills in total in the Toronto waterfront in the mid-1800s. They all merged together eventually to create one big platform of land. Anything to the right of us, so that's the south, is man-made land. That includes the land that the CN Tower stands on, about a 1 kilometer stretch from here to the Toronto Harbour. As we're passing through Old Toronto, it's a good time to talk a little bit about Toronto's history and the origins of the word. Toronto is a First Nations word, and depending on which language you're speaking, it could mean a few different things. The Huron called Toronto a place where trees stand in water, because this area used to be very, very swampy. The Mohawk call Toronto a meeting place, which is still a very apt meaning because here in Toronto we have the combination of all sorts of different cultures and ideologies coming together. So we called this area Toronto for a very long time. However, with the arrival of Europeans, we had a few changes. There was a man named John Graves Simcoe who arrived on the scene in the late 1790s, and he wanted to change the name Toronto to something that sounded a little more British. He changed the name to York after the Duke of York. Now, we weren't a very big fan of the name York because there was a city just to the south of us called New York. You might have heard of it. A lot bigger than us, kind of overshadowed us. We got a lot of unfortunate nicknames like Little York. At the time, New York was just developing concrete streets and sidewalks, whereas we only had dirt and muddy streets. So we got the nickname of Little Muddy York, Dirty York, Nasty York. Not a very fond name for us. So we did change the name back to Toronto in the 1830s. We waited until John Grieve Simcoe died to do that. A little bit passive-aggressive. However, if you asked anyone at the time, they probably would have said they were being polite. You'll still find lots of different parts of the city called York, or named after York, like York University, York Street, Yorkville, and more. Just to the right side now, we're about to pass one of the most important sites in all of Toronto's history. It is historical, it is cultural, it is architectural. It is the Big Wax Car Wash. Contain your excitement. The Big Wax Car Wash is not a very important site of Toronto's history, but we are going to go through it. No, I'm just kidding. That wouldn't be very fun for us up top. Very important because this land used to be where the very first Parliament buildings of Canada used to stand. If you take a look at the street sign in front of us, it says Parliament Street. The Parliament of Canada has moved around a few different locations. It's been here. It's also been in Montreal for a short period of time, as well as in Ottawa, where it currently stands. Now, what happened to these Parliament buildings? Well, they burnt down. During the War of 1812, we had a little bit of a conflict with the Americans to the south of us. The Americans came here and burnt down our Parliament buildings because they were trying to liberate us from the British. A lot of us here were British ourselves, so we said, no thanks, no liberating needed here. So we instead ran down to Washington, D.C. a few years later, and we set fire to the President's house. The President's house at the time was a lovely shade of salmon pink. But when we burnt it, it was very charred and black, so they painted it over with a nice coat of whitewash, and since then, America has been very well known for the White House. But here in Canada, we have the Big Wax Car Wash, so take that, America. We're going to come up now to stop 22. This is the historic distillery district. If any of you have changed your mind and do want to get off at any of our next few stops, please shout out at me and let me know. We will be pausing here, though, to let a few people join us. Alright, now another very important parking lot just to the right of us. I know I'm pointing out a lot of those, but this one is also important, trust me. This is going to be the site of the Athletes' Village of the Pan American Games. In 2015, we'll be hosting this big athletic competition that leads up to the Olympics. This is where the Athletes' Village will be. It is just about to get started with construction. When the Pan American Games are over, they're going to convert all of these Athletes' Village homes into residences for the George Brown College students, as well as affordable residence subsidized housing for some Toronto people as well. We're now entering a neighborhood called Corktown, not because we're so close to the distillery district, but because we're in a neighborhood that was settled heavily by Irish from the county of Cork in Ireland. Take a look behind us to the left, we have the Enoch Turner Schoolhouse, and also the Little Trinity Church just to our left. The Irish who settled here after the Great Potato Famine did not have a lot of money on them. They spent most of it trying to get a boat ticket to get to Canada in the first place. So, they could not afford, unfortunately, the pew fees that was very common in churches in that time. They also could not afford tuition, as most schools were very private at the time. So they established the first public school and the first free church in all of Toronto. And those are the buildings that we just can look at behind us at, just to our left. Little Trinity Church is a nice little church. It is one of the longest standing, it is the longest standing church in all of Toronto. Not because it's the oldest, but because it is made of stone and it did not burn down in our fires that we've had. Which stop did you want to get off at? 24. Okay. If you look up above us and on the top of the street, you'll see some wires. These are streetcar wires that operate the King Street streetcar. Not a very good idea to touch these wires as they are highly electric. Please stay away from them. This operates our streetcars. We are one of the few cities in North America to still have our original streetcar network, such as New Orleans and San Francisco. The King Street streetcar is the busiest in the city. Thousands of people use it every day. Very busy, especially because it goes right through the heart of Toronto's financial district. We'll be seeing a little bit of that shortly. And if you look out in the front of our bus, you'll see a streetcar, a number of cars ahead of us, just strolling along. This part of Toronto, King Street East, is the home of Toronto's design district. So you'll find lots of different interior design and furniture stores. If you take a look around here, you'll see some examples of those as we go along King Street. A couch in this area is said to be priced at about $50,000. I'm looking for that couch. I want to find out why it's so expensive. Maybe I'll find it one day. If you take a look across the street on the left, you'll see a red and white building called Staples. This is an office supply store. It is not part of our tour. It is not interesting. But the land that it stands on used to be the site of Toronto's dueling grounds. Yes, we used to have duels in the mid-1800s, a way to defend a man's honor. If any of two gentlemen got together and had a bit of a problem to sort out, they would walk out to here. This was considered the outskirts of the city. They would come to the dueling grounds, they would stand back to back, they would take 5 paces away from each other and turn and shoot. Now, you might be familiar with how a duel works. If you lose a duel, you die because you get shot. If you win a duel, in Toronto at that time, you would eventually be taken back to the city core and be arrested and hanged for murder. Kind of a little bit of a lose-lose situation. Now this area of Toronto, Old Toronto, is not very old looking. Looking around, you might say these buildings are not that old. And you're right. In fact, the oldest of these buildings is about 100 years. That's because the original settlement of Toronto all burnt down. All of the original buildings in Toronto do not exist anymore. A little bit disappointing, but we can still recall some of the history of Old Toronto as we go through this area. In 1849, we had our first Great Fire. And when I say great, it was not fun and fantastic. It was big and destructive. It took out about 4 city blocks, which was the entirety of the city at the time. After that happened, we decided, you know what, we just can't have this happen again. We're going to make it a law that every house and every building must have at least 1 bucket of water. Now, if you ever tried to put out a fire with 1 bucket of water, you'd realize that it does not work so easily. So in 1904, we had another Great Fire. This one took out about 16 city blocks, which again was pretty much the entire city. The flames were so high they were visible from St. Catharines, Ontario. That's a town just north of Niagara Falls, about an hour and a half to drive from there from today, so very far away. We had to call in the fire departments of Buffalo, New York, as well as Hamilton, Ontario to help us put out the blaze. Very devastating. One of the problems with the second Great Fire in 1904 was that it was February. If any of you have ever been to Toronto in February, you'd know that its weather was not very similar to what we have today. All of those buckets of water would have been frozen solid. Not very easy for putting out fires. We also had the recent development of electricity in the early 1900s, and there were a lot of low-hanging wires. It was new for us, and we didn't exactly install them very wisely, so the fire trucks were unable to get to the second and third story windows of buildings. If you take a look to your right, you can see a stone building with white awnings called the Grange. This is the only building to survive either a Great Fire. Ironically, it is owned by a man that was the only person to die in either Great Fire. He actually owned a newspaper office in there called the Toronto Patriot, and he passed away of smoke inhalation trying to save his office. To cheer you up if that was a little bit too sad, if you look at your right side, you have the lovely Victorian-style gardens of St. James. They act as the backdrop to St. James Cathedral. This is the second tallest church in all of Canada. The tallest is St. Joseph's Oratory in Montreal. This is the Joseph Church for the Queen Elizabeth, when she comes to visit the city. A lovely little Anglican church, and it marks the beginning of Church Street. Church Street has 10 churches in total, 3 cathedrals. We're coming up shortly now to stop 23, which is for the King Edward Hotel. If you take a look on our left, you can see this yellow brick hotel. It is under construction now, and it has blue awnings. The King Eddie has hosted lots of different famous celebrities in its time. Anyone from Margaret Thatcher to Britney Spears and anyone in between has stayed at the King Edward Hotel. We also had the visit from the lovely Elizabeth Taylor and a gentleman, Richard Burton, in the early 1960s. They were not married to each other at the time, but they did stay in the same hotel room. And in the early 1960s, the Toronto residents thought this was way too scandalous to handle. They went outside the hotel and protested and picketed against Elizabeth Taylor. Times certainly have changed. A few months later, we got a visit from the Beatles. They were on one of their North American tours, and we were so excited to have them, and fans were screaming and so enthusiastic outside of the King Eddie that we actually did a lot of damage to the front entrance and the front windows, and the Beatles had to be barricaded into their hotel room to keep them safe. Sorry, Beatles. As we continue along King Street, we're going to be coming up to Yonge and King. Soon we will be entering the financial district of Toronto, the financial hub of all of Canada. As we're stopped at the red light, I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the King Eddie. The grounds that the King Eddie stands on used to be the hanging grounds of Toronto. We did have capital punishment back in the day. Mid-1800s, you could be arrested for all sorts of things, like stealing a loaf of bread. And following the War of 1812, you could be arrested for singing, whistling, or humming Yankee Doodle Dandy, and a song that was just too spirited and too enthusiastic about America. And as we had just finished a conflict with the United States, singing that song was considered high treason and could get you hanged. We do not have that rule anymore, so if you'd like to sing Yankee Doodle Dandy, please do so to your heart's content. We also don't have capital punishment anymore, which is a good thing as well. But because the King Edward Hotel stands on those hanging grounds, it is considered one of the most haunted buildings in all of the city. If you're looking for a good spook, you might want to check out the lobby of the King Eddie, or get a room there. If you take a look to the left side, you can see this building on the